Welcome to another episode of the Man Talk Monday podcast. My name is Augustus C. Foster. And if you're watching this or if you listen to this, whatever it is, I'm grateful and thankful. Today's episode, revisiting emotional intelligence, specifically emotional intelligence in our sons and our young boys. Now, the reason I'm revisiting this topic is specific, it's targeted. Uh, unless you've been under a rock, I know people are fully fully engulfed in the passion and the pageantry that is the World Cup. But right now, this isn't about the World Cup. This is about the ongoing issue that we have in America. And this crosses lines, this crosses racial lines, this crosses class lines. So when I talk, I really speak to it from a standpoint of young black men, but also in this case, really young white men also for this. I want to talk about emotional intelligence because, again, unless the World Cup is happening and the NBA draft and the NFL draft, but right now we're still seeing the outcomes of what occurred with Carmelo Anthony, not Carmelo Anthony, the basketball player, but Carmelo Anthony, the young man who was charged with murder. And the reason I want to discuss emotional intelligence is because there's a lot of thoughts that people have about this case. Now, as somebody who quite literally began attending college with the expressed interest to go into law and to become an attorney and to practice law, yeah, law school dropout, basically. I am not here to talk about mens rea. I'm not here to talk about causation. I'm not here to talk about degrees. I'm not here to try to explain or articulate the criminal process or proceedings. Like your initial year in law school, if you're studying law outside of regular, before you get into tort, civil, all before you get into any of that, one of the first classes they have you take is like a basic criminal law course. Like you'll do that and they'll throw you like back into like a US history and US law course so that you have basic infrastructure. So again, I repeat, I'm not here to discuss causation. I'm not here to discuss mens rea or what people would know as criminal intent. I'm not here to discuss that. I can somewhat in a layman's term as a quote unquote law school dropout, but I'm not. I'm here, which this will likely break down into three parts. I'm here to discuss Carmelo Anthony, Austin Metcalf, and now Terrion Arnold, and how emotional intelligence could have prevented this entire situation. So for a brief overview of what occurred back in April of 2025, uh, two kids, let's call them what they are. Yes, he's charged as an adult because it was an adult decision, but realistically, this is two kids. They're down somewhere in Texas, and they get in a disagreement under a under a tent over space. And what begins as a verbal disagreement escalates to a physical altercation, which escalates again into someone's life being taken. Now, again, I'm not here to discuss the legal aspects of it, of what's murder, what's manslaughter, what's self defense, castle doctrine, stand your ground. I'm not here to do any of that. I'm here to say that emotional intelligence or the lack thereof played an extremely important role in what occurred here. Uh, from the standpoint of that day, you had a young man, Austin Metcalf, who was there with his twin brother Hunter. Austin, he's decorated athlete. I believe that's it comes from what will always be reported as good home. To call it what it is a young white kid whose talent solely is a good home. I know from everything that's been said, you hear his father talk, but I don't believe the father and the mother are married, which I think that's going to play in a little bit later of the conversation. On the flip side, very similar to Carmelo Anthony, like pretty middle class middle class family, where it's the mother and I believe again a stepfather. But Carmelo is different. There's from a racial standpoint, there's the black tax, which I think we'll do an episode on that too. But a young man who, yeah, I believe he was working like a part-time job at a restaurant or something like that, just to kind of be the filler, to kind of, hey, you're progressing into manhood, you're on your way out soon, kind of get you ahead of the game. So this is the groundwork. Two young men, two good homes, nothing tragic, no criminal backgrounds, both decorated athletes, both solid students, two people that you from the outside, the way the news portrayed it because of all of the heavy racial dynamics, two regular, two good American kids. Now the reason I say emotional intelligence lacked in here is when they laid out the facts of the court, it was a raining day, and here's the young man Carmelo Anthony, and he's looking to get out of the rain. He doesn't have his own tent, so what does he do? He goes to this other tent where there's the rival team. And this was the beginning of the failure of emotional intelligence. I will never say the young man Austin Metcalf deserved to die. I won't. What I will say explicitly is part of his demise was his own lack of emotional intelligence, awareness, discipline, and what I'll likely talk about in the second portion of this, which is the culture. And the culture, when I say the culture, I don't necessarily mean the culture is black people, because you have a lot of folk who will come out here, specifically black conservatives, and will say, the black culture, the black culture. No, 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 no. This sit in that. And I myself consider I lean more to being a conservative for a multitude of reasons. But those people, when they spout that, it's for likes, clicks, views, and a check. A hard stop. Austin Metcalf did not deserve to die. And the beginning of the failure of emotional intelligence is part of the reason why he died. You see, we should emphasize to our sons and the important men in our lives in a young age, at a young age, hey, you should know how to regulate your emotions. You should know how to read the room. You should know how to how to navigate dealing with other people. You should know these things. And I emphasize teaching it to young boys because of this situation. Now, Carmelo Anthony, from the way it plays out, goes under the tent and the disagreements start. You're not supposed to be here. This ain't your spot, whatever it is. Because these two, they've seen each other in passing. It's even though Texas is big, it's small town Texas, it's athletics, everybody runs across each other, popcorn or whatever. It's just like I'm from California. Everyone knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. It's the degrees of separation are tight. Now in this, what ends up happening is there's a verbal altercation. From the standpoint of emotional intelligence, the communication is lacking because, like I said later, the culture has told Austin Metcalf, do this. So his immediate response to this young man coming under the tent, regardless of what your thoughts are, the racial side, whatever, I could be a coon, I could be an Uncle Tom, whatever. You tab me as that. If that's your thoughts. But Austin Metcalf failed to utilize emotional intelligence. Instead of seeing or applying some level of empathy for whatever the rain is or whatever the level of wet is outside, or even if it were a sunny day, here's Carmelo Anthony. Hey, man, can I just get under y'all tent? No. And it escalates. Now there are more of them than there are Carmelo Anthony, which leans into the later conversation of law and his protection. But at this point, it's all verbal. It's all verbal. Even to the witnesses, hey, they're just young, they're jawing back and forth. And again, it's Austin Metcalf who doesn't recognize that, Ben, I just let him under the tent. I literally could just imagine. I want you to think about it this way. Imagine if when Carmelo Anthony went under the tent to get out of the rain, that Austin Metcalf, instead of being triggered by his presence, went kind of just heard him out and went, "Hey, bro, yeah, yeah, man. It's our tent, but you got to just just be careful. It's not that much space." Any conversation like that, if he'd have showed a little bit of empathy, if he'd have processed it that way, if he had a little bit of understanding, but he didn't, because it's also the rage and testosterone of a 17-year-old kid. Look, man, no, you got to get out of my tent. Imagine if Austin Metcalf doesn't react that way. Imagine if Austin Metcalf just goes, "Yeah, bro, you could be in here. Hey, y'all, calm down. We're not having this discussion." Now we go to the next move. Karmelo Anthony escalating the situation verbally and putting out what witness said was the threat of "touch me and see what happens." Again, the implementation of the culture and the lack of emotional intelligence from another kid. From another kid. Touch me and see what happens. So this is a young man who trust issues somewhere along the line, because he goes under this tent under the presumption that he's going to be allowed under the tent, because maybe he thinks they're going to extend him some empathy. Like, even I want you to listen closely, and this will be a clip. I want you to process it this way from a standpoint of the multiple arms and aspects of emotional intelligence, specifically for young boys. Two 17-year-olds, remove race, two 17-year-olds from good homes, from good families, who are athletically talented, who are academically excelling, get into a disagreement. One goes into an area because he assumes these people will extend him empathy and he'll be allowed in that area. The other doesn't extend that empathy and escalates it with harsh verbal communication. The initial person then, in turn, they respond back in kind and poses a threat of "see what happens." Now we escalate to the physical. And in that physical altercation, one of them draws a knife and stabs the other in the chest. Think about the way I just laid that out and how we got here. We got here because there was no empathy, there was no communication, there was no compassion, there was no patience, there was no understanding, there was no thinking, there was no emotional intelligence. Two 17-year-olds raging out. And for what reason? One, to prove the point that this is my tent. Like, this is, really think about it. Austin Metcalf died because he felt someone didn't deserve to be in his space. He felt Karmelo Anthony wasn't entitled to be under his tent. Karmelo Anthony is going to likely spend the rest of his life in prison, because when a situation escalated, he operated out of, "I have to be the problem solver." Now, in telling that story, at no point did either of these young men go, "Let me go to get an adult," because the culture doesn't dictate that. So this lack of understanding, impatience, zero empathy towards each other, the awareness of their surroundings. No, they were caught in emotions. They were caught in rage. They were, one of us got to be right. One of us got to show the other one. And in the end, one lost their life. Physically gone, never to breathe again. And the other lost his life from the standpoint of freedom, never to see another, breathe another breath as a free man. All because they lacked the emotional intelligence and discipline to handle themselves in the right way. So as I wrap up part one and continue this in the part two where we discuss the culture, I want you to think, I want you to process this. Imagine, just imagine If these two young men at any point decided to extend some courtesy to the other, to read the room, to recognize that I don't have to be right, that maybe I give a little bit of empathy, maybe I give a little bit of space, maybe I communicate this differently, maybe I could calm down. Imagine if these two calm down, where we'd be today. Now I want you to think about it like this from a standpoint of your own children, specifically your sons. And you see certain patterns from him and how he moves and how he acts and how he reacts to things. I pray he's not on that path. But you got to understand, where's his level of emotional intelligence? More importantly, where's yours? Greatly appreciate you, as always, for listening. Part 2 comes soon. God bless. Peace.